Good afternoon, Keith Tebow from FRC Media. As we get closer to the November 8th state election, we're talking to candidates and those who are involved with ballot initiatives to make sure that you will make an informed choice when you head to the ballot box or vote by mail. Today, there is actually a ballot initiative which is separate from the state ballot referendum. It's only in the city of Fall River, also the city of New Bedford, but we're going to talk about Fall River here. And that is asking voters whether the city should become members of the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority or the MBTA. That will allow the city to be part of the MBTA and actually be part of the process of South Coast Rail, which will be here in Fall River late next year. I'm here joined now by Paul Chase. He is the CEO of the Southern Realtors of Massachusetts, Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts, and is also part of the coalition for South Coast Rail here on the South Coast, asking people to vote yes on the question in November. Paul, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for having me.
So, you know, when you talk to people about South Coast Rail, obviously it's been on the table for 30 years, right? I remember Governor Weld talking about it back in 1990, that South Coast Rail will be here. As we get closer, and this has to be passed now, what are you telling people in terms of why they should vote yes, and why will South Coast Rail be very important to Fall River and the South Coast?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say, not to be lost on everything, is that we're about $900 million into $1 billion project already, and it's slated to start next year. It's still on time from everything we're hearing. But this particular ballot referendum is required by the MBTA to allow Fall River to be part of the MBTA community. Well, what does that do? That allows the MBTA community, all MBTA communities have to pay into a regional transportation assessment. Mm-hmm. The interesting piece is that Fall River already pays into the regional transportation assessment. And it's my understanding, after talking with the folks in the Fall River City Hall and Mayor Coogan's office, that they already pay the maximum amount. There's a cap based on the size of the city. I don't know if it's population or size, but there's a cap on what you can pay for your regional transit assessment, and they've already paid it. So this essentially will not increase because Fall River is going to join the MBTA communities.
Yeah, and that's because of our affiliation with CERTA.
Correct.
The bus line that services Fall River.
Yes.
Let me ask you, Paul, you know, South Coast Rail has been talked about, you know, since the early 90s.
Sure.
And, you know, it's been in the past few years. I believe 2019 they broke ground for South Coast Rail and here in New Bedford. Why wasn't this vote held earlier?
You know, that is a good question that I have not been able to get an answer to.
Right.
So I'm not sure where the disconnect was. My guess is it has something to do with the fact that back in the 90s, this was officially put on as a regulation of the MBTA. But years before that, both New Bedford and Fall River had rail. So this was reestablishment of rail. And maybe there was a thought at one point that it was already taken care of, but it wasn't. That I'm not sure of. I just know that Fall River is not the only one. New Bedford has to do it as well. And so here we are. It's an official vote as a referendum to join the MBTA community.
What happens if the city votes no?
So if the city votes no, the legislature still has the ability to go and create legislation or regulation to allow the city to be part of the MBTA community. From what I understand, there is something that can be done. Obviously, we'd much rather see the referendum pass and pass well. As we talk to a lot of residents in South Coast Massachusetts, they really would like to see the rail to begin with. So it's kind of like, you know, last minute, it's a referendum, but it's good for folks to understand and realize that it's here, let's pass it, and let's get it going next year. You know,
people who are challenging this vote and challenging whether the city should have South Coast Rail.
Sure.
They talk about the cost. You brought up about the assessment. They also talk about the fact that, you know, the MBTA is looking like it's going to have a big budget deficit next year, and whether a city like Fall River, if they're in the MBTA, will have to pay any additional costs. Right. From what you understand, is that a possibility?
At this point, no. So I don't have a crystal ball for the future, but at this point, again, it goes back to the regional assessments, and the regional assessments are already being paid, like you said, through the SRTA system. Could it increase 5 or 10 years down the road? It could. I would imagine that's a possibility. Anything could increase, but as of right now, that is not the case.
Yeah. As we look at South Coast Rail, there's still a lot of unknowns about the potential that it could provide for a city like Fall River.
Sure.
You're a realtor, the CEO, as I said, the Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts. One South Coast Chamber, of course, also heavily invested in this coalition.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
What could potentially be the benefit of Fall River once you get the train actively working? You've got people coming between here and Boston and stops in between.
Sure.
In terms of potential economic development opportunity here.
Right. So we say there are a lot of good reasons for rail. Improved access is the main reason. Improved access for jobs, additional jobs. Improved access for additional critical health care. We have a lot of great health care down here and a lot of specialties, but there are far more in the Boston area. There are more opportunities for colleges and universities right through the Route 24 belt. It stops at Bridgewater State College. It goes right by UMass Boston and then goes into Boston. And then finally, increased tourism revenue for small businesses in Fall River. I mean, it's that economic development that you were talking about, the growth back and forth, but it's also for the residents of the city as well. That, there are a lot of residents that don't own cars in the city. I mean, they take the bus every single day. They're not afforded the ability to go to Boston without a huge issue. In this point, they could get on the train and go.
Do we actually know how much the fare will be? Do we know
Not
that
yet, and they've said that they will not know that until just before they release the routes.
So could that be another impediment for some people, like you said, who may not have transportation? It still may be a little cost prohibitive. We don't know, but
sure, it might be a little bit. But what we do know is that between gas prices and between cost of the car and parking when you're up there, it's not going to total to that type of money. So, I can't imagine what it's going to cost, and I wouldn't want to guess, but it's certainly not going to add up to what it would cost you to drive your car up there, the wear and tear, the gas, and having to pay for the garage of $45, $50 parking up there. It's not going to total that. So it's definitely a benefit. And then it's a benefit also for the folks that have to go there to work, because we're seeing a lot more in Chicago, Washington, major metropolitan areas now. We're finding that commuter rail that have longer services, because this will be like a 90-minute service, that some of the larger corporations now are building that time into their workers' day. So they don't work 8 hours in the office. They work perhaps 7 hours in the office, because half an hour going up and back, they do work on the rail as they're going along. So it's a benefit. It's a benefit for a lot of people, but particularly for the folks down here who, this is the only area in Massachusetts 50 miles outside of Boston that doesn't have commuter rail.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, in terms of a 90-minute commute, driving into Boston may take that long depending on the day, right, to get to work. And in some ways, you don't have to drive. You don't have to worry about the angst, the anxiousness of being in traffic. But it is also quite a commitment for people that have to work in Boston. That is a long day. That is a long day for people. And, in some ways, again, some of the opponents will say, why would I want to take the train? I might as well just drive, and I can get home when I want. I can take alternate routes maybe to get home.
Right.
How do you?
But the fact of the matter is 90 minutes is the minimum of what it's going to take to drive now. If you drive up to Boston from Fall River, we are back at pre-pandemic levels. DOT has been saying it for the last 3 to 6 months. An hour and a half is if there are no problems. I mean, my son works in Boston, and it could take him 2.5 hours to get up there or back. Sometimes it's worse coming back than it is going up. So that 1.5 hours, that's still very, very low when you think about how long it actually takes you to get on the road and get to your destination.
Now, I know this is when South Coast Rail begins next year. It's called Phase 1,
yes,
which is coming through Middleborough, Lakeville, and then down here. When Phase 2 which hopefully will get completed, who knows when,
Right.
which will go sort of a more direct route into Boston, right, through Stoughton.
Correct.
Right.
It'll take the other side of Route 24.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that projected to be a quicker trip? Do you know?
So there are some predictions that it may be a bit quicker because it's more of an electrified rail and not a diesel rail. But quite truthfully, we haven't gotten to the point in Massachusetts where we're doing electrified rail. So that still kind of remains to be seen at this point. And the reason why the cost is in phase one is so much less than what phase two is because we're already using rail that was already here. So the governor, Governor Baker, who's been a huge supporter of this, really wanted to see this happen and tried to figure out a way we could go from a $3 billion expense on the rail down to a $1 billion, and that's what we did. We utilized the Lakeville route and extended the line down to Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton at a much less cost, at least so we can get going. And then we'll see how demand works, what we're looking at in the future, and then, you know, phase two will come along once they can get back into looking at budgets and things.
You know, again, getting back to some people may be against the MBTA and South Coast Rail, a lot of what people are saying is there's also a lot of unknowns, right? There's always been talk that, well, you know, people who may currently live in Boston may want to move to Fall River because real estate is cheaper here, rents are cheaper here. Do we actually know that may happen, or what level of that may happen? Is it, you know,
Right.
are we, is your side maybe, you know, lifting up levels a little higher than what may be reality?
Right. So there's a lot of anecdotal information out there when it comes to rail setting in a particular area. But I don't have any hard numbers that show when a rail comes into an urban area that all of a sudden that urban area just shoots up beyond what the capacities can be. Naturally, we've seen real estate, we've seen rents going up, but they've been going up for years. And a lot of that has to do with housing inventory, which is a whole other topic we could have someday. But that is the big problem we have, not only in this area, but it's also in the state, and quite frankly nationwide, but primarily in the state. So rail has a very little effect on that in the end. To me, the successes far outweigh the issues, you know, for our residents.
Yeah. As someone in real estate, do you look at the possibilities here? And again, another argument that we made is, well, you know, there'll be more market rate housing. It doesn't fit the population of Fall River. It's for developers more than it is for the people who live here. Right.
And what I will say, going back to the housing issue that we have, market rate housing is not a bad word. What market rate housing does is allow people that are in apartments to move into their first home, and that allows other people to move into the apartments that are taken up by first-time home buyers that can't find a home. There is a whole level of inventory from multifamilies to market rate to low income. All of it is needed in the city of Fall River, just like it is in New Bedford, because there is not enough to take care of the population we have now.
Yeah.
So market rate is just one area of that, but certainly more market rate will help every other sector too.
Yeah. All right, we're just about ready to wrap up. I want to give you the opportunity to give a pitch to the voters of Fall River. You can look at that camera right there on why they should vote yes on supporting Fall River's being part of the MBTA.
Sure. So we're really excited about this. The MBTA community is ready for us. Like I said, we have about 900 out of the $1 billion spent. You've been seeing it here in Fall River, all of the updates, and it's important that we provide access to the local residents in the way of jobs, in the way of healthcare, in the way of college university opportunities, and in the way of economic development and tourism dollars back down to the city for first-time home buyers. All of this is going to help Fall River residents and small business owners in moving forward with Fall River. It is not the puzzle, but it certainly is the piece to a puzzle in Fall River, and you know, their better economic development opportunities.
All right, Paul Chase, CEO of the Realtor Association of Southeast Massachusetts and also part of the coalition of Boston
Real to Boston.
Real to Boston. I don't know
Real
why
to
I
Boston
can't get that straight in my head. Real to Boston Coalition. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate
I wish you
it.
the best.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you.
And thank you for joining us here in FRC Media. And please make a point to vote before November 8th.